So Scientology is kind of basically, after Hubbard dies, it's starting to become a more well thought of, publicized, promoted thing in the general public. It's the late 80s now. People are not looking at it as this horrible, awful cult. They've reformed. They got rid of the GO. Hubbard died. We got rid of all the bad apples, right? This is the public face that the church is putting on, and it's working.
Okay, and this reminds me of this period reminds me of kind of the post-polygamy Mormonism where the church realized that it became a state in the United States. Eventually it was voted in. And then eventually it realized that having these long-bearded polygamous prophets wasn't going to jive well with the modernization of America. And so starting in the 50s, the church cleaned up its act, got rid of polygamy, figured out its corporate structures, began to modernize, and began to fight for, an image that became squeaky clean, clean cut, almost like IBM level, business-like and American. And you go from Mormons being these creepy, weird, bearded polygamists on the frontier to like Donny Osmond,
right?
Level, like, the Mormons are the good guys, the squeaky clean, hardworking, honest, family-based people. And that was a long haul of the church cleaning up its act, getting its finances in order, almost going bankrupt, but then reworking its image. And in a very short period of time, let's just say a few decades, going from being a laughingstock scourge that's bankrupt to a growing global, almost well-respected organization that started to have a great deal of influence, and most importantly, celebrities like the Osmonds, the Marriotts, Steve Young, and athletes and that sort of thing.
That is exactly parallel. That is precisely what Miscavige was trying to do with Scientology.
Yeah,
and he couldn't quite get there at this time period because of the IRS threat. So that was where all of his attention, or most of his attention, was at. But internally within the church, exactly what you just said. Everything you just said is exactly what Scientology was trying to get going. Come out of their dark phase and their awful phase and people in jail phase to, no, we're good people. Look, we have this moral code, and we have Dianetics, and it will help you with your mind. And we have Scientology, and it will bring you to advanced spiritual states of existence that you can't even believe and dream about. And that's what we have to offer. And aren't we a wonderful bunch of people? And isn't this all just great? That's exactly the image the church was trying to put out there. And they repackaged the entire grade chart, all the materials of Dianetics and Scientology got new book covers and new, glossy look. They had previously, Hubbard's lectures had been on reel-to-reel lectures, right? That was the quality. That was where their technology was at. So they started converting all of that to cassette tapes, because that was, the latest and greatest they could afford in the 80s. And they started doing in-house. They've started building in-house publishing facilities. And, they were really trying to make a go of this thing. And put on the best public face that they could. And like I said, it was starting to work. And certainly people were willing to line up behind the message that the IRS are the bad guys, not the Church of Scientology. Anybody in the 80s could connect with that message. And of course, it helped that the IRS was an abusive organization itself. So Miscavige is fighting this fight. And the Dianetics is now beginning. I think statistically speaking, if I remember right, Dianetics as a word went from like 10% name recognition across the United States to like 90% within a year or two because of this promotional campaign and stuff. And this is what the Sea Org was working on. So then somewhere around 91, I think it was, this IRS problem was just kind of persisting and persisting and persisting. And internally, Miscavige was still more than happy to get rid of anybody who crossed him or got in his path. But being as focused as he was on this, he went and actually dropped in at the IRS office and went and talked to the commissioner of the IRS. Goldberg, I think his name was. And they actually started hammering out an agreement. And by 93, the IRS basically was exhausted. They only have, people think of the government of the United States as this monolithic organization where all the money goes into this black box, and look at all this billions that they have, and they can solve any problem and do anything they want. But it doesn't really work that way. And the IRS specifically is like any other department or division of the government, has a budget. They get allocated a certain amount of money, and that's what they get. And if all of that money gets tied up in legal threats and suits and fighting private investigators who are literally following your employees around, and they're not down with this, they're quitting, they don't want to be stalked by Scientology because they're trying to work for the IRS. So there were lots of reasons why the IRS commissioner was like, look, I'm kind of done with this. Can we just drop it and move on? And, you got to give me something here. And so Scientology spent 2 years, and there was a lot of back and forth, and there were a lot of questions. I've got all these documents. And they hammered out an agreement. And of course, and I have documented it in my book and in videos, the Church of Scientology lied through their teeth to the IRS about what their activities are, about what their structure is, about what their goals are. They gave them a song and dance. They told the IRS exactly what the IRS wanted to hear. And the IRS capitulated. And in 1993, they gave them tax-exempt status back. All the churches of Scientology, all the organizations,
unbelievable
all the organizations, everything they wanted, they got. In exchange for that, they paid a pretty hefty sum of back taxes, but it wasn't the amount that would have destroyed the church. I mean, I think at this point they had accumulated something on the order of $1 billion tax debt or something. I mean, it was big. And they forgave that. I think they ended up paying him a couple million or something. And that was it. The war was over. And I cannot even begin to overstate the importance of this victory for Miscavige, for his position as the leader of Scientology, and for Scientologists in general. Because now they could claim deductions on their tax returns for Scientology donations and services. And people in Scientology sometimes pay tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars at a pop to the church. So to now have it be, to get tax credit on that, to have it be tax exempt, right? And it gave the church a whole new lever to use to get people to donate because their donations are tax deductible, So this was a huge, huge coup, big, gigantic one. And David Miscavige, within a week of getting the tax exemption, organized this gigantic event at the LA Sports Arena, 10,000 person capacity, and they packed that place. It was the one time they actually packed an event hall. And they had people flying in from around the world for this special announcement. Nobody knew what it was. I went there. I was in Santa Barbara at the time. I was on staff, and I drove down to LA to go to this event. So I was there, and I heard him, and it was this 3-hour briefing. He talked all about the history of the church's battle with the IRS and how the IRS were, a bunch of, horrible, awful people who would try to take out Scientology over the years, along with Interpol and the FBI and the CIA and every other alphabet organization that ever existed. They were all against Scientology. They all wanted its doom and destruction, and they had beaten them all. And David Miscavige is the one who did this entire briefing. And if you didn't know who David Miscavige was at this point, as a Scientologist, you were definitely going to know now. And of course, I actually skipped over the fact that in 92, he had done a interview on Nightline with Ted Koppel. And that also got him out into the public eye.
I remember that. Yeah, that was pretty bold, right?
Yes, it was. And he came out as the leader of Scientology, and he, duked it out with Ted Koppel. I just watched it a few days ago. I just rewatched that to answer a question somebody had, and he, he didn't really come off that badly. I mean, he came off horribly if you actually want to look at a factual, account of what he said. He was just, throwing the lies out left, right, and center about what Scientology is really all about. But he kind of, held his own against Koppel's questions enough, so as good as any politician would do. Let's put it that way. And so he got a lot of cred for that, because this was the first time that Scientologists were ever seeing anybody from Scientology duking it out with Ted Koppel on Nightline and presenting Scientology as this wonderful, amazing, you guys are just a bunch of liars. You don't get it. This is what we're all about. This is a good thing, da-da-da. And Scientologists loved that, right? So that gave him a lot of cred. But then this IRS victory happens. I just can't overstate it. David Miscavige was God after this. I mean, he was just the man. He was the head of Scientology. Everybody knew he was the head of Scientology now. He was the spokesperson. He was the representative. He was the guy who was leading the whole movement. And look what he just accomplished. And of course, this was all worded in such a way that he was the one who, made it all happen. But in a way, he did. This was his big victory moment. And this was sort of the pinnacle of his achievement for Scientology, as he did save the church, and everybody knew it. So he was untouchable at this point, and that's really the key takeaway I'm trying to get across at this point is by 1993, no one was ever going to challenge David Miscavige.